Testing, testing. All right, got some audio, video. We're good. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Hizzy Hustle. Today we got a awesome announcement from the Bank of Canada. Got another interest rate drop, 25 basis points. So we'll take a look at that announcement here pretty quick. What does this mean? I don't exactly know. To be honest, I think it's kind of preemptive action based off of what could happen over the weekend or on February 1st when these tariffs could potentially come into play. I think they're just kind of trying to give Canadians maybe a little bit of relief. And I think they had mentioned in that Korea update video a few days ago that there's only one rate drop scheduled for the year, apparently. So if this is it and the tariffs don't come, I wouldn't expect to see another rate drop for the rest of the year. However, if the tariffs do come and we need a little bit more economic relief, you can probably expect to see that happening. All right. So first things first, we will do our thing and take a look at the listings for yesterday. So in the last 24 hours in the Okanagan here, total area from Penticton to Revelstoke, 73 new listings, one on the market, 11 price decreases, and only 17 sold. So a big uptick for listings yesterday. 14 canceled and 5 expired. Nothing too crazy on that one. Let's take a look here.
Tiff Macklem, the Bank of Canada governor, has just started speaking. Let's head there now.
Alan Rogers to discuss our decision and our new monetary policy report. Today we lowered our policy interest rate by 25 basis points. This is our 6th consecutive decrease and brings the policy rate to 3%. We also announced our plan to complete the normalization of our balance sheet, ending quantitative tightening. The bank will restart asset purchases in early March, beginning gradually so that its balance sheet stabilizes this year and then begins to grow modestly in line with economic growth. We have 3 main messages this morning. First, inflation has been close to the 2% target since last summer. Monetary policy has worked to restore price stability. Second, lower interest rates are boosting household spending.
I really dislike how they try to package this because, sure, inflation is technically at 1.8%. I believe there's some other changes or whatever. If you go look at the Bank of Canada website or whatever, it's like roughly 2.4%. I don't know what the exact ramifications of that are, but there's like other economic factors in that one. Price stability, I don't like that either. Every Canadian feels like they're getting punched in the face by raising costs. So to tell people that things are looking good, economy's looking strong, it's the wrong dialogue to use.
And economic activity is picking up.
Still,
Third,
wrong dialogue.
The potential for a trade conflict triggered by new U.S. tariffs on Canadian exports is a major uncertainty. This could be very disruptive to the Canadian economy and is clouding the economic outlook. Aujourd'hui, on a abaissé le taux directeur de 25
Today,
points
we
base.
lowered the policy interest
Cette
rate by
sixième baisse consécutive fait passer le taux.
is our 6% target since last.
Ça pourrait beaucoup.
This economic outlook.
Since the scope and duration of possible trade.
I don't speak French.
Since the scope and duration of a possible trade conflict are impossible to predict, the NPR projection we published today provides a baseline forecast in the absence of tariffs. We also provide some discussion of the potential consequences of a major trade conflict. Let me expand on the first 2 messages before turning to the threat of tariffs. First, inflation. A year ago, inflation was 3%. Short-term expectations were still elevated, and inflationary pressures were broader than normal. In recent months, inflation has remained close to 2%. Business and consumer expectations have largely normalized, and there is no longer evidence of broad-based inflationary pressures. Shelter price inflation remains elevated, but is gradually coming down. While we expect some volatility in CPI inflation due to temporary tax measures, our forecast is that inflation will remain close to the 2% target over the next 2 years. Second, growth. There are signs economic activity is gaining momentum as past interest rate cuts work their way through the economy.
Once again, I don't believe this is the right dialogue to use, because to the average Canadian, the economy doesn't look good. And if you're looking at it just strictly numbers, sure, there is some economic growth and there is some stuff happening, but it is typically in the top kind of 1 percentile, 5 percentile of the population that's actually seeing increases in wealth. Because if you don't have money to put into things during times like these, then you'll never come out ahead. You'll just keep getting farther and farther behind. So these people that are ahead will get farther and farther ahead, and the wealth gap is just going to continue to grow. There's nothing you can do about that one.
Lower borrowing costs are boosting activity in the housing market, as well as spending on big ticket items like automobiles. The pickup,
especially when the automobiles now are so expensive. Like, what can you get brand new for $30,000? Like, I remember $30,000 when I was first getting my driver's license got you like pretty damn well the best fully loaded truck out there. Like, I think the 2008 Dodge Ram, when they first changed the front grille to made it like angled or whatever, a buddy of mine picked that up when we were in high school. Well, maybe it was closer to a 2010 actually. And he picked that up for like just over 30 grand or something like that. And we were like, oh my God, you're so rich, dude. How do you have all this money in high school? It was just a mind blowing thing. And now it's like, I went to shop for a vehicle 2 years ago for $30,000. And I was just like, I'm just shopping for used vehicles.
But household spending is starting to broaden to other consumer items and is projected to strengthen further. Business investment has been weak, but is forecast to increase gradually. And the outlook...
We need to go nuclear. Get some foreign investments in. Get some nuclear infrastructure going up in the northern kind of back 40 that we just don't use. Get some cryptocurrency mines going up there and some nuclear power plants, man. Use that cold, arid winter north and use it to our advantage, man. Like, we have the ability to become a powerhouse when it comes to energy.
For exports is being supported by new export capacity for oil and gas. Employment has strengthened in recent months.
I actually had a client that works up in Fort McMurray for, I can't remember if it was Suncor or the other one. But apparently over the last few years, 5 years, 10 years or so, they have been talking and researching and working really, really hard on a lot of like nuclear reactor type of technology up in the northern Alberta area, which in my opinion is amazing. And I think a lot of them were just kind of waiting for the last kind of 5-year period over what's going to happen with the new government mandates and stuff like that, because, you know, if we stick on the liberal trend of carbon taxing the crap out of everybody, I just don't think people are going to go invest in energy as much. It's just not worth it here. They'll just, like you said, they'll pack up and head down below the 49th parallel.
But with job creation having lagged labor force growth for more than a year, the labor market remains soft. The unemployment rate was 6.7% in December, and wage pressures, which have proven sticky, are showing some signs of easing. The bank forecasts GDP growth will strengthen from 1.3% in 2024 to 1.8% in 2025 and 2026. Growth in GDP per person is projected to pick up as lower interest rates and rising incomes support spending. The projected increase in overall GDP growth is more modest than it was in October, largely due to lower population growth that reflects new federal immigration policies.
I'm not even going to touch on that one.
There are risks around the outlook, and Governing Council is equally concerned about inflation rising above 2% or falling below it. Absent the threat of tariffs, the risks to the inflation outlook are roughly balanced. Let me now turn to the question of tariffs. U.S. trade policy is a major source of uncertainty. There are many possible scenarios. There's a lot we don't know.
I'm still sticking to it that he's going to start at 3%. I don't know why I'm going with that number. I've seen some people talking about it. I've seen some articles. I think Trump is always going to be the type of person that does something, even if he doesn't want to do it, and even if he's not going to actually implement these 25% tariffs, he has to implement something so he can say that he did it. It's the way he works. It's always the way he works. Even with these executive orders, half of them are going to get shut down in Congress, but he's signing the executive orders. So at the end of the day, like he's a man of his word, right? And he will play that card till his deathbed. Like it's just the way he is. And if people haven't figured this out by now, I don't know what our politicians are doing, because these guys trying to puff their chests out and say that, oh, we're gonna take out Trump, we're gonna hit him back where it hurts. It's like, just, I get it. I do get it. I don't want Canada to seem like a weak country, but we've created the illusion that we are a weak country just over what has happened over the past 5 or so years. So puffing your chest out now isn't going to be what makes Canadians feel like our government finally has our back, right? Like, I don't think it's the right move to make. I think we need to focus more internally, which I've seen some stuff about, right? Like they're clamping down on our borders and that type of thing, which is more about what he wants to see anyway. So if we I really hope we can manage to dodge this one, because 25%, man, if that gets hit, like, a lot of people are going to be worried. A lot of jobs are going to go missing.
We don't know what new tariffs will be imposed, when, or how long they will last. We don't know the scope of retaliatory measures or what fiscal supports will be provided. And even when we know more about what is going to happen, I do need to be clear, it's still going to be difficult to be precise about the economic impacts, because we have little historical experience with tariff changes of the magnitude that the U.S. is contemplating. Nevertheless, some things are clear. A long-lasting and broad-based trade conflict would badly hurt economic activity in Canada. At the same time, the higher cost of imported goods will put direct upward pressure on inflation. The magnitude and timing of the impacts on output and inflation will depend importantly on how businesses and households in the United States and Canada adjust to higher import prices.
The only other possible thing that I can think of when it comes to why he's doing this is to just make the Liberals look even worse. Because if they were to implement the tariffs up until the election, essentially, over the rest of this year, essentially, it's just going to make the Liberals look horrible. And then who knows what happens after that, right? But it might just be a indirect way of trying to influence an election to go one of two ways. There's no basis behind that comment. It's totally speculation, but hey, it could be the case. You never know. I've seen crazier things happen.
Unfortunately,
Oh,
tariffs
no
mean
more French.
economies simply work.
A source of economic stability. Monetary policy cannot offset this. What we can do is help the economy adjust. With inflation back around the 2% target, we are better positioned to be a source of economic stability. However, with a single instrument, our policy interest rate, we can't lean against weaker output and higher inflation at the same time. As we consider our monetary policy response, we will need to carefully assess the downward pressure on inflation from weakness in the economy and weigh that against the upward pressure on inflation from higher input prices and supply chain disruptions. So let me tell you what we're doing in preparation. In recent years, we have invested in better information on supply chains, trade links, and the connections between sectors. And this is helping us analyze the effects of supply disruptions, including tariffs. We've begun assessing the possible consequences of different tariff scenarios, and we present an example in the Monetary Policy Report. We are stepping up our outreach activities across the country to hear directly from those affected by trade uncertainty. This includes augmenting our surveys of business and consumers to better understand how trade uncertainty is affecting their decisions and how they would cope in the event of a trade conflict. We will update you on our analysis and assessments as developments unfold. Having restored low inflation and reduced interest rates substantially, monetary policy is better positioned to help the economy adjust to new developments. As always, the bank will be guided by our monetary policy framework and our commitment to maintain price stability over time. With that, the Senior Deputy Governor and I would be very pleased to take your questions.
Okay.
There it is. Sounds like it's they're trying to help Canadians. I don't know how much it's going to help, but we'll see.
Thank you, Governor. And we will go to questions now.
See what we got
starting
for some
with,
questions.
The roughly dozen or so reporters I have here in the room in Ottawa, after which we'll go to those who have joined us remotely. As usual, I'll ask you to please limit yourself to one question so that every media outlet does get a chance to ask. And if I forget to do so, please state your name and affiliation. Please remember to use the microphone here in the room to ask your question.
I'm not from Toronto.
And before you ask your
Toronto.
question, please identify yourself, give your affiliation, and of course you are able to ask your question either in English or French.
From the Wall Street Journal.
Governor, the decision talked about how the Canadian dollar is depreciated materially. Does this indicate that the so-called limits of policy divergence have been reached and BoC officials are worried about its potential impact on inflation? And would a weaker currency limit the Bank of Canada's ability to provide support in a trade conflict?
How much you want to bet Trump will say that if we adopt the American dollar, he won't tariff us?
Okay, you packed a lot in there, Paul, and I know you know this, but I do want to begin by reminding everybody that we don't target the exchange rate. The flexible exchange rate is an integral part of our monetary policy framework that allows us to gear monetary policy in Canada to the specific situation in Canada. So if you're asking us, has the movement in the Canada-U.S. exchange rate constrained our monetary policy decisions to this point? The answer is no. We've cut our policy interest rate 6 consecutive times now, bringing the rate down from 5% to 3%, 200 basis points.
Man, look at that. That's so bad. I don't even know what to say.
That is having some impact on the Canadian dollar, but as we discuss actually at some length in the Monetary Policy Report, that effect is...
Notice how we stabilized after that fall economic update.
Relatively modest. The depreciation we've seen, the recent depreciation we've seen in the Canadian dollar has been more driven, in our view, by trade uncertainty, and particularly President Trump's threats to impose 25% tariffs on Canadian exports. You can see that from a number of things, but in particular, if you look at the timing of the depreciation, it follows very closely on President Trump's threats. This is a more material move in the Canadian dollar. I mean, if you go back to October, Canadian dollar was 74 cents. It's now...
That is not because of Trump. That has nothing to do with the U.S. This is because of us. That's the only thing it can be. We announced a $62 billion deficit down here. When it was announced it was only going to be $40 billion around here. This is Canadian government spending that's doing this, not Trump's announcements. There's no way you can possibly convince me otherwise.
been fluctuating. It's now sort of 69 to 70.
These influxes now,
So,
sure.
Look, that is a
But
material
that drop,
depreciation, and
it's not because of somebody else. It can't
will
be.
start to have some impacts. I mean, depreciation makes our exports more competitive. Of course, the threats of tariffs will make them much less competitive. But it also has some other impacts. It means that everything we import will, the cost of things we import, it will be higher. And you will start to see that relatively quickly on things like fresh fruit and vegetables, which obviously it's winter in Canada. We import a lot of those from the United States. That'll get passed through pretty quickly.
Wow.
More generally,
Can't wait to pay $6 for a single avocado.
pass-through tends to take, it tends to be pretty slow. It tends to evolve over time, but that is something that we have built into the outlook that you see today. The other implication of a weaker Canadian dollar is that any intermediate inputs, so for example, machinery and equipment, investments Canadian companies make, buy equipment from the United States, that becomes more expensive. That will hurt our investment. So those things, we've assumed a 70-cent dollar.
I mean, farmers already got to spend $500,000 on a freaking tractor. What are you going to do? Make them spend another, what's 25% of 500? 125,000, 625 grand. Crazy.
In the projection that we published today, and the depreciation we've seen so far is built into that. Going forward, look, there's no doubt the exchange rate is responding to the threat of tariffs, and I think it's reasonable to expect that as developments unfold, that will be financial markets. We'll take that on board. It'll be reflected, and that is something that we will have to build in to our outlook. And obviously, the bigger the movements in the Canadian dollar, the more we're going to have to take those into account as we set policy going forward.
Okay, we'll go now to Promit Mukherjee from Thomson Reuters.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning.
I think the single biggest factor that hurts our economy and our dollar is government spending. In some way, shape, or form, we are spending too much money. End of story. And we're spending money we don't have.
Morning, Governor. So you have said that in the event of a 25% tariff and possible retaliation from Canada, monetary policy might not be able to offset that. But do you think quantitative easing will be one of the tools that you can resort to?
So I think what you're saying is, your question is, what's going to happen to interest rates if 25% tariffs are imposed?
No, actually, I wanted to understand that is quantitative easing one of the tools?
Oh, quantitative easing. Sorry, I missed that part. Okay.
I was actually curious about this too. I don't exactly know what that means, and I was going to Google it, but I have too many browsers open.
We're a long way from needing quantitative easing. I mean, our policy rate is at 3%. We recently published a review of our use of our extraordinary tools during COVID, and what we concluded was that the bar for using quantitative easing in Canada has always been very high. In fact, we've only used it once when we had a once in a 100-year pandemic. And the bar for using quantitative easing should remain very high going forward. We're a long way from that, and we have plenty of room with our policy rate.
Okay, next.
I don't even know if I spelled that right. Oh, I did. The most basic terms, QE and QT, are opposite actions. QE refers to the Fed buying assets to lower long-term interest rates, and QT means selling. So quantitative.
I'm going to go to Kevin Carmichael of The Logic.
What did they say?
The mics here and
We recently we're a long way from needing quantitative easing.
Quantitative easing. So that's when they're selling the assets, I believe, right? No, quantitative easing is buying assets. Okay, so that's when the government starts buying stuff in order to help interest rates drop. Okay, interesting.
I mean, our policy rate is at 3%.
Do your best to focus into the microphone when you're asking your questions. Kevin.
Okay.
Good morning.
This is the next question.
Are the threat of tariffs baked into what you've done today, the policy decision and the forecast? I know you've laid out in excellent detail about how difficult it is to anticipate what might be coming, but did you try to factor in the tariff threat in any sort of...
I think this is the I think this is the interest rate drop that's going to already happen in the year. I think if there's another one that happens, it's in response to the tariffs.
way in what you've done today?
Well, I'll answer that in two parts. With respect to the forecast that we published in the Monetary Policy Report, I think we're very clear. It assumes that there are no new tariffs. It does include a modest effect of the uncertainty being created by the threat of tariffs, particularly on investment. But effectively, in the projection, we're assuming that, the threat of tariffs, it's a rather nice scenario. The threat of tariffs sort of dissipates, that uncertainty goes away, and we don't have to deal with it. We go on in the second part, of course, at looking at a scenario where there are broad-based and actually permanent new tariffs to give some idea of what the impact would be. But that is not a forecast. Coming to the decision itself, obviously the forecast is an important input in the decision, but obviously the risks around it also factor into the decision. We've got to look at the whole landscape. So, I mean, if you start with the facts on the ground, what's going on in the economy, what you see is that inflation has remained pretty close to 2% since last summer. And if you look at all our indicators of inflation, underlying inflation looks like it's running around 2%. We're not seeing broad-based inflationary pressures. Secondly, the economy is still in excess supply. Labor market's soft, unemployment rate 6.7%. That softness in the economy, that slack in the economy, that is putting downward pressure on inflation. We want to see growth pick up, take up that slack to keep inflation close to 2%. And we are starting to see that. Growth is picking up, and we want to see that pick up sustained to absorb that slack. So, I think those things suggested that, a further cut made some sense. Then you look out the window and the threat of tariffs is there, and there's no doubt, that weighed on our decision.
That's for a future decision, though. If there's tariffs, there'll be another drop.
We can get the economy on a solid footing before it faces new tariffs, the better. And from that risk management perspective, I think that reinforced the decision to cut the policy rate by 25 basis points.
Okay, I gather we're going to have mics being handed out, and Jordan Gowling, Financial Post, you're next, please.
Morning, Governor. If you only have the policy rate, can you just explain to Canadians what the Bank of Canada's role is in a trade war scenario?
Well, obviously, we need to understand what a trade war would do to the Canadian economy. That's the first thing we need to do. We need to analyze it and assess it. Obviously, there's a lot of things we don't know right now. We don't know what new tariffs will be imposed, when, for how long.
Well, it kind of feels like we're just going down this continuous rabbit hole question. Let's see what...
Be considering further rate cuts.
To inflation, the direction it's going. And there's a whole basket of things we look at. And at any given time, depending on what's going on in the economy...
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it's just kind of repeating the same stuff from this point. Let's see what these guys have to say.
To provide guidance.
Okay, that's it for Ottawa. We're going to go to the phones now.
Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem just toward the end of his news conference. A quick recap here. He said off the top he had three messages, including inflation, which is near 2%, the desired level, and he believes that it should stay there for the next couple of years. He said that Canadian consumer spending and economic activity have been picking up. However, as he has been detailing, a major trade conflict with the United States would create major uncertainty in the Canadian economy and could be very disruptive. He said it's really impossible to know the scope and the length of the tariffs when they come, and that he and the Bank of Canada have very little experience dealing with this kind of thing, and that long, broad-based tariffs that are broad-based and last a long time could really hurt the economy. As far as quantitative easing, he was asked about that. He said the bar is very high to do that. Bank of Canada has only done that once, and that was during the pandemic. And he said ultimately the bank is going to have to weigh weaker economic growth based on the tariffs and higher inflation. It could be a complex shock, as he called it, and also saying that monetary policy cannot offset the tariffs, but we will see a less efficient economy, and if nothing else, the Bank of Canada monetary policy can at least adjust to what is happening, and we will wrap it up there in terms of our recap. We're going to bring in Tu Nguyen, economist at RSM Canada. She's here in studio for some analysis. So good to see you, Tu. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so your initial reaction and takeaway from
Let's see what
the
she's
Bank
got
of
to
Canada.
say.
We knew the rate cut was coming, the commentary, and what you heard in the news conference.
Well, so this rate cut, I agree, was desperately needed for the economy to continue its expansion. We know that we've had 6 rate cuts in a row, and the economy, including business investment and consumer spending, did pick up on that. Now, in addition, inflation and inflation expectations have eased back to historical norms. So those are all reasons for more rate cuts to occur, especially since wage growth has also cooled and jobs growth has improved, but it's not where perhaps we wanted it to be yet. Now, moving forward, the only certainty is uncertainty ahead, right?
Okay.
So
well, I don't think we need to continue going down this road. That's pretty much it for today. That was what I kind of wanted to touch base on. Yeah, that's good. We're gonna see a lot coming this weekend. Yeah, we're in for an interesting time here in Canada. It's really unfortunate, but best thing to do now, make sure you got no debt and start stacking some cash, because I've been seeing Warren Buffett is going more cash positive now than he has in like the last decade or something like that, and he's getting ready to buy assets. So if that's the case, then that means some type of correction's happening. We're in a little bit of a pit, and it's going to take some time to get out of it. So, take care of yourself. Be smart with your money, and hopefully you can see some benefits coming out of this one as well. But anyways, thanks so much for tuning in. Like always, my name is Tyler Heisman, licensed realtor here in the Okanagan with Oakland Realty and the Heisman Group. Feel free to give us a shout. You can follow me. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Make sure that you know when we're going live, because we'll be doing this quite often. Try to build a little bit of a community here. Oh, and I just started TikTok. 30 years old. I refused for the longest time to use TikTok, but it seems to be very, very beneficial for a business. So follow me on TikTok, The Hizzy Hustle, Instagram, The Hizzy Hustle, and you'll see all my personal information from there. So yeah, thanks again for tuning in to anybody who does.